They told me I was just being sensitive, that I should be grateful to even have a family. Now that I'm gone, they're wondering why I don't call. Maybe it's time they finally reflect. The echoes of my childhood still coil around the corridors of my mind, lingering like a stubborn mist that refuses to lift, no matter how brightly the sun of self-awareness burns. Every memory feels wrapped in gauze, muffled, softened, and yet the sting of it cuts deeper than any blade ever could. They told me I was too sensitive when my eyes welled up after a careless remark. They told me to be grateful when my pleas for kindness were met with mockery or cold indifference. I was born into a house that smelled of duty rather than affection, a house where the floors creaked not from age but from the unbearable weight of unsaid things, of unacknowledged pain that sank into the bones of the very walls themselves. It took me years to understand that love was not supposed to feel like a war zone, where I was expected to duck and weave through barbed words and silent treatments as if dodging shrapnel. Every tear, every clenched fist buried in a trembling lap, was seen not as a cry for connection but as an inconvenience, a disruption to the fragile illusion they insisted on maintaining. My role was scripted long before I was old enough to comprehend the lines they demanded I speak. I was the scapegoat, the misfit puzzle piece they tried to jam into a mold shaped by their own insecurities and unmet expectations. When I dared resist, when I dared question why affection must always be conditional, their rebuke was swift and sharp. You're lucky you even have a family at all. The cruelty was insidious, slipping into daily life like smoke under a door. It wasn't just the overt criticisms, though there were plenty of those, each one a stone tossed onto the mountain of shame they were determined to build atop my shoulders. It was the subtler acts of betrayal that eroded me, the birthdays forgotten not by accident, but by a pointed choice, the proud achievements that were met with tepid nods or backhanded compliments, the endless comparisons to others who were, invariably, more obedient, more grateful, more palatable. I learned early to silence my hurt, to stuff it deep into the crevices of my spirit where I thought it could do no harm. But pain, when caged, does not wither. It festers, it grows claws, and it waits. There came a day, unremarkable on the surface, a Tuesday perhaps, under a gray, indifferent sky, when the final thread snapped. There was no grand confrontation, no shouting match worthy of a climactic novel scene. There was only the quiet, profound realization that love, real love, should not demand that I amputate pieces of myself to fit into its narrow confines. I walked away without ceremony, the door clicking shut behind me with a soft finality that belied the earthquake trembling beneath my ribs. I did not announce my departure, nor did I offer explanations. I had given them my voice for too long. They had used it only to weave a narrative where I was always the villain of my own story. The silence I left in my wake was deafening for them. In the years that followed, I heard through strained grapevines and second-hand whispers that they wondered aloud at my absence. Why doesn't she call? Why doesn't she visit? They clutched their confusion like a tattered cloak, unable, or unwilling, to look beneath it and confront the rot, festering there. I imagine them now, sitting around a table cluttered with memories curated for comfort rather than accuracy, picking at the bones of a family meal while pretending not to notice the gaping chair that once held my tentative hopes. Meanwhile, I have been rebuilding my life from the ashes they so carelessly scattered. Each day, free from their judgment, has been a slow knitting together of wounds I had long forgotten even existed. I have learned to hear the soft voice inside me, the one they always insisted was too sensitive, too fragile, too needy. That voice, once so battered and small, now sings with a tentative courage, weaving songs of resilience and hard-won peace. I have built a sanctuary within myself, brick by careful brick, with walls not to keep love out, but to keep harm from slipping in, disguised as affection. There is a kind of radical power in choosing yourself after a lifetime of being told you are not enough. It is not a fireworks and triumph kind of power, but something quieter, deeper, a steady flame that refuses to be extinguished. I have found laughter that does not carry the undercurrent of fear. I have found friendships stitched with mutual respect rather than obligation. I have discovered that family can be chosen, crafted intentionally from those who see you not as a burden, but as a blessing. I know they sit there, lost in their curated amnesia, wondering why the phone no longer rings with my voice on the other end. They wonder why I seem happier, more whole, even from a distance. They wonder without ever daring to look inward, without ever considering that the love they offered was laced with poison. Maybe, someday, they will have no choice but to sit with the echoes of their own neglect. Maybe, in the hollow spaces left by my absence, they will hear the things I was shouting all along through my silence. But that is no longer my burden to carry. I am no longer the child aching for their validation. I am no longer the scapegoat blamed for their unhappiness. I am no longer the silent participant in their theater of dysfunction. I am something else now, something freer, something fiercer, something incandescent. And I have no intention of dimming my light for them ever again. Time is a curious thing when healing begins. It moves not in straight lines nor in neat logical steps, but in loops and eddies, sometimes dragging you back through old wounds, only to spit you out stronger on the other side. In the early months after I left, when the air around me still smelled faintly of sorrow and liberation, there were nights when the ache of absence wrapped itself around my ribs so tightly that breathing felt like a conscious decision. I did not miss them, exactly. I missed the idea of them. The myth I had clung to like a drowning woman clutches driftwood. The desperate belief that perhaps, someday, they would see me, truly see me, and offer the kind of love that did not demand the sacrifice of my spirit. But myths are not meant to survive close inspection. When exposed to the harsh light of truth, they wither and crumble, revealing only the brittle skeletons of hope and denial beneath. I had spent too many years polishing the veneer of our family, excusing their cruelty, rationalizing their neglect, telling myself that all families were flawed, that love sometimes wore the mask of criticism. I had twisted myself into shapes so unnatural that I hardly recognized the person staring back at me in the mirror. It was only in the silence of my new life, in the blessed stillness where their voices no longer invaded every corner of my mind, that I realized how profoundly they had trained me to doubt my own worth. There were days when guilt would slither up from the depths, hissing that I was the one who had failed them, that loyalty meant enduring whatever was asked of me, no matter the cost. The old narratives they had planted in my psyche blossomed like poisonous vines whenever I dared to think too kindly of myself. Who did I think I was, after all? Who was I to turn my back on the people who had given me life, however tainted that gift had been? But the voice of guilt, though persistent, grew weaker with each step I took away from their orbit. Every moment spent cultivating friendships that nourished me, every boundary drawn and defended without apology, every act of radical self-compassion was a nail in the coffin of the person they had tried to make me into. Their confusion at my absence was almost laughable, if it weren't so profoundly tragic. They had never listened to the words I spoke. Why would they start now? In their minds, my departure was a betrayal, a senseless act of cruelty from an ungrateful child who had dared to imagine she deserved better. They spun their narratives in the safety of their echo chambers, comforting themselves with half-truths and outright fabrications. They whispered to anyone who would listen that I had changed, that I had been led astray, that the world had poisoned me against them. Never once did it occur to them that the seeds of distance had been sown by their own hands, watered by years of dismissal and harvested in the bitter, aching silence they now found unbearable. I remember the first birthday that passed without a forced family gathering, without the brittle smiles and hollow congratulations that had once punctuated the day. I spent it walking alone along a riverbank, the water glinting gold under the heavy gaze of the sun. In my memory, I felt no obligation to perform gratitude, no pressure to feign joy for the sake of appearances. There was only the quiet thrum of my heart, beating steady and sure, and the slow dawning realization that my life no longer belonged to them. I had reclaimed it, piece by fragile piece, and though the loneliness still howled at the edges sometimes, it was a sacred kind of loneliness, untouched by the corrosive demands of those who claimed to love me. The weight of their expectations had once felt immovable, a monolith against which I had battered myself bloody for years. Now, from the safety of distance, I could see it for what it was, a construct built on fear and control, not love. True love, I had learned, does not require subjugation. It does not silence dissent, does not punish authenticity, does not demand that one swallow indignities whole and call them affection. True love offers room to breathe, to stumble, to become. It nurtures rather than diminishes. And though I had been starved of it for so long, I had learned to recognize it in the kindness of strangers, in the laughter of chosen family, in the fierce, unwavering gaze of my own reflection. They still call sometimes, though I rarely answer. When I do, it is out of a sense of curiosity rather than obligation, a detached observation of creatures who no longer wield the power to wound me. The conversations are stilted, filled with awkward pauses and careful omissions. They speak of mundane things, the weather, distant relatives, vague updates on their own lives, but never of the chasm yawning between us, never of the years of hurt and silence they refuse to acknowledge. It is as if they believe that by pretending nothing has changed, they can erase the reality of my departure, erase the person I have become without them. But I am not so easily unmade. Each call ends the same way, with a perfunctory goodbye, a polite but distant promise to talk again soon, and the hollow echo of what might have been if only they had listened, if only they had cared enough to see me. I hang up the phone and sit in the quiet, letting the sadness wash over me without drowning. I grieve not for them, but for the love that could have existed between us, the love that was smothered before it could ever fully bloom. It is a grief without teeth now, without the power to consume me. I honor it, then let it pass like a storm rumbling harmlessly on the horizon. In the spaces they left behind, I have built something stronger, something real. I have found joy in the simplest things, a cup of coffee shared with a friend who asks about my dreams and genuinely listens, a Sunday morning spent curled in bed with a good book and no sense of impending doom, a laugh that bubbles up from my chest without fear of being ridiculed. These small moments, once so foreign, now form the bedrock of a life I chose for myself. A life where love is not earned through sacrifice but given freely and received with open hands. There are still scars, of course. Some wounds leave their marks no matter how carefully they are tended. I am wary of new relationships, quick to retreat at the first sign of emotional danger. I am learning, slowly, that not everyone is waiting to weaponize my vulnerability. Trust, once shattered, is not easily rebuilt. But for every moment of fear, there are a dozen moments of courage, of reaching out instead of pulling back, of believing that I am worthy of kindness, not because I have suffered enough, but simply because I exist. Sometimes I wonder if they ever sit with the silence between us and truly listen to what it says. I wonder if they ever replay old conversations in their minds and hear the desperation woven between my words. I wonder if they ever feel the hollow ache of my absence and realize that it was not my sensitivity that drove me away, but their refusal to honor it. I wonder if they understand that love without respect is nothing more than control wrapped in pretty paper. Perhaps they do. Perhaps they don't. It hardly matters anymore. My life is not a monument to their failure. It is a testament to my own resilience, a living, breathing declaration that I will not be defined by the wounds they inflicted. I have turned my pain into wisdom, my grief into compassion, my loneliness into a fierce, unyielding love for myself and the life I am creating. I have learned that walking away is not a betrayal, but an act of profound self-respect. I have learned that choosing peace over chaos is not weakness, but strength of the highest order. And most importantly, I have learned that I am not too sensitive. I am not too much. I am not ungrateful or broken or wrong. I am human, gloriously imperfect and deserving of love that does not require me to make myself small. As I sit now, looking out over a city that hums with life and possibility, I feel a deep, abiding gratitude, not for the family that failed me, but for the journey that brought me here, for the strength to leave when staying would have destroyed me, for the courage to build a life that honors who I truly am, for the wisdom to know that sometimes the only way to survive is to stop answering calls from those who never really heard you in the first place. The silence between us stretches on, vast and unbroken, a monument to everything that was said and everything that was not. It does not demand to be filled. It simply exists, a quiet, steady truth against the cacophony of excuses and denials. And I am at peace with it, because sometimes the greatest act of love you can offer yourself is the decision to walk away and never look back. The seasons turned, slow and unrelenting, each one etching new lines into the landscape of my life. Years had passed like whispered confessions, the kind that slip unnoticed between breaths, until one morning I woke and realized that the scars they left behind no longer defined me. The anger, once a roaring storm, had softened into a quiet, firm resolve. The ache, once so raw it painted my days in shades of sorrow, had dulled to a memory I could touch without flinching. Healing, I learned, does not erase the past. It weaves it into the fabric of who you become, a tapestry of survival that refuses to be unraveled by the ignorance of those who never cared to see its intricate threads. It was a letter that arrived one brittle autumn afternoon, folded neatly in an envelope that bore the familiar handwriting I thought I had forgotten. A few short lines scratched onto pale paper, filled with brittle attempts at familiarity and hollow words of longing. They missed me, they said. They wished things could be like before. They wondered if I could find it in my heart to come home, if just for a little while. No mention of the wounds they had inflicted. No acknowledgement of the years I had spent scraping myself up from the ruins they left behind. Just a simple, almost lazy assumption that proximity would heal what apology never touched. I sat with the letter for a long time, letting the words bleed into the quiet of my apartment. Once it would have broken me. Once I would have rushed to their doorstep, heart pounding with hope, desperate for crumbs of affection. I would have stepped back into the carefully orchestrated charade, smiling through gritted teeth, pretending that love was enough to cover the chasm of betrayal. But that version of me was gone, scattered on the winds of every boundary I had learned to hold firm. There would be no return to the theater of false smiles and unspoken resentments. There would be no homecoming parade for a prodigal child who was never lost, only discarded when her truth became too inconvenient. I did not respond to the letter. I placed it back in its envelope and tucked it away, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder that closure is something you give yourself, not something you beg from those who refuse to understand you. I had spent enough of my life explaining my hurt to people who wore blindfolds, stitched from their own guilt and pride. I had screamed into 1,000 silences, thrown myself against walls that would never yield. It was not my responsibility to dismantle their delusions, nor was it my duty to set myself ablaze just to light the path back to a place that had never truly been mine. The final severing was not marked by anger nor by dramatic declarations. It came quietly, like the last leaf drifting from a tree in late November, inevitable and oddly beautiful. I understood, finally and completely, that my life was no longer entwined with theirs in any way that mattered. Blood, as it turned out, was not a tether strong enough to bind souls together. Love, respect, understanding. These were the true threads of connection, and ours had long since unraveled beyond repair. I moved forward, not with bitterness, but with an unshakable peace. The family I had lost had never truly been mine to begin with. They were an idea, a hope, a longing that had clung to me out of habit rather than reality. In letting go of them, I had made room for something far more precious. I had made room for myself, for the friends who had become family by choice, their love as sure and steady as the rising sun, for the passions I had once buried beneath layers of doubt, now blossoming into vibrant, unapologetic pursuits, for the life I was no longer content to survive, but determined to fully inhabit. There were moments, fleeting and tender, when the past would brush against the edges of my mind. A song on the radio, a scent carried by the wind, a memory stirred by the curve of someone's smile. I did not banish these echoes. They were part of my story, after all. But they held no power over me. They were footnotes in a narrative that had long since shifted its focus from pain to perseverance. One evening, as the sky blushed with the deep bruises of sunset, I found myself standing at the edge of a vast meadow, the tall grasses swaying in the gentle breath of the earth. I closed my eyes and listened to the hum of life, to the steady beat of my own heart, to the vast and sacred silence that stretched out before me. It was there, in that boundless space, that I understood the final piece of my healing, forgiveness. Not the kind that demanded reconciliation or reopened old wounds, not the kind that excused or erased the damage done, but the kind that set me free. I forgave them, not because they asked for it, and certainly not because they deserved it, but because I deserved to be free of the heavy chains of resentment. I deserved a life unburdened by the ghosts of people who could not love me in the ways I needed. In forgiving them, I did not invite them back into my life. I did not reopen doors that had been closed with deliberate finality. I simply released the last tether that bound me to a past, soaked in sorrow. I let them go, fully and finally, and in doing so, I stepped fully into the light of my own becoming. There would be no phone calls, no letters, no surprise reunions where tearful apologies mended the unmendable. There would only be the quiet certainty that I had chosen myself, again and again, even when it was hard, even when it meant walking alone into the unknown. And that choice, made 1,000 times in 1,000 small ways, had built a life that was breathtaking in its authenticity. I stood there in the fading light, arms wide to the embrace of the world, and whispered a goodbye that needed no audience, no validation, no reciprocation. Goodbye to the girl who thought love was something you had to earn by suffering. Goodbye to the family who taught her that her worth was conditional. Goodbye to the years spent chasing acceptance from those too broken to offer it. And hello to the woman who rose from the wreckage with fire in her veins and hope in her bones. Hello to a life that tasted like freedom, rich and wild and full. Hello to the future I had crafted with hands once taught only to grasp, now open wide to all the beauty yet to come. In the end, it was not they who defined me. It was not their approval or their absence that shaped my soul. It was me.